Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy at Sweetfish Media. Today, I've got with me Reid Lappin, who is CEO at Vokal. How you doing today, Reid?
Good, Nikki. Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here. It's a little gray outside here in Austin, but the way the weather changes, it could be sunny in the next 15 minutes. So I won't let it get me down. So you're going to be talking to us today about how you use LinkedIn to grow your business, which is a hot topic. Everyone's talking about it. I'm excited to steal some nuggets from you, quite frankly. But before we get into that, I'd love for you to just, sort of introduce yourself, give us a little background and talk a little bit about what you guys have been up to these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So Reid Lappin, I'm the CEO of Vokal. We're a Chicago-based product design experience agency, and we've kind of gone through a few iterations in terms of our growth over the last 9 or 10 years. And when we started the business, we were one of the first players getting into designing and building mobile apps. There was probably, a couple hundred apps in the App Store. It wasn't something that necessarily had taken off. But I think what we had really realized with mobile as a whole is, as users and as consumers, it really shaped our behavior and brought us so much closer to brands in a digital capacity, where web was maybe a little bit more periodic. We weren't always attached to a computer. And so we really found that as a path for us to leverage these behaviors in a way that we could help brands really find ways to kind of strengthen their core business using digital and finding opportunities for moving into new products and services. We've seen companies, like Weber Grill or like Whirlpool move into content or move into kind of meal planning, and where once these organizations were manufacturing boxes that heated objects, cooled objects, cleaned objects, they can now find a different way to be more helpful to the user. So today, where we primarily play is really in kind of core product design and development. And what we focus on there is really finding details and opportunities that don't live in requirements. I think the challenge with agencies is that you're kind of given a scope of work and it's got a list of features, or you kind of go through a period of defining these features, but these requirements don't define moments of magic or unique opportunities to kind of position the product differently. And the other area where we're seeing a lot of growth is really the way I look at it is kind of how do we get to speed to traction or speed to failure as quickly as we can, as we're exploring opportunities that are either at the core of the business or potentially adjacent, but aren't existing products or services that they may offer today. So that's really where we've had our success. And I think it's very timely in terms of where the market's going and where we're seeing a lot of the needs. For sure.
It's like you and I talked about offline. These folks are just not looking for just a development partner anymore because of the shift that you just described. Talk a little bit about some of the ways that, folks who are in the space like you are, or some of the things, some examples of what you've done to help folks be innovative and get quick wins given the changes that you just described.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer of seeing is believing. So a few of the tactics is one, trying to work in software and design as quickly as we can. I think a lot of these projects, And a lot of these initiatives start in a deck or in kind of a document. And I think the faster we can get to prototyping and testing and using a variety of tools to do that. We've done things such as doing a Kickstarter campaign for a Fortune 500 under a name that you wouldn't associate with them, to just see kind of what click-through rates we would get from Google AdWords or like LinkedIn, Facebook targeted ads. So doing some really kind of quick early segmenting and testing to just even maybe before we write code to see what kind of interest we're getting around the product and to see what types of demographics are showing the interest to help kind of shape and lead us into our design and pilot exercises. So I think that these aren't necessarily traditional approaches that organizations may take. In fact, I think one of the core tactics that we go on here at Vokal is using capital as a constraint, where I think a lot of the clients that we work with usually cash flow very well and are really excited about these digital initiatives and innovation initiatives. So they're providing a lot of capital, but when we don't use that as a constraint, we can kind of overbuild or overinvest without ensuring that we understand product market fit and that we understand our design decisions to really support and manufacture, frankly, early success as we go to market.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I could see how that would contribute to this whole relationship aspect that we're going to get into here in a minute. You mentioned at the top that some of the traditional ways for doing this do not create moments of magic. Describe what those look like as far as what your approach is doing to create those moments of magic.
Yeah, so for us, a lot of the inspiration we got really was from doing a deep study and analysis and consistent homework on Pixar, as they were a company that took an industry that had existed for a while, just graphic animations, and just frankly found a way to do it better. And their attention to detail is absolutely remarkable. I mean, I remember when I first started exploring Pixar, I was watching Toy Story with our first son, who's now 2.5, but he was younger then. I remember a moment where I saw, I think it was a drawer that was open. You could just see the scratches on the drawer. And then came a moment when the soldiers, kind of parachuted down to go see what Andy was opening in terms of a gift. And if you looked at the baseboards had so much character. And it just was like, I looked over at my baseboard and I'm like, why does that look so real? Why did a designer take the time to think about a baseboard? And so it got me really exploring in the products that we work on that, a lot of these products have kind of all become uniform because they're kind of following each other. And there's good things to that, but it also kind of stops you from that creative moment you might have. So, when I describe it as I try to, if we're driving in the speed limit zone of 25 miles per hour, let's say most people are driving 25 in terms of who our clients are and who our competition is. I try to keep our team at a pace of, call it 35, 37, 35 at the beginning of the month, and maybe in 30 to 35 at the end of the month in terms of cops trying to get their quota. But I try to the point is just trying to really keep our team on the boundary of thinking and not just letting status quo kind of drive all the decisions that we make when it comes to design details and how we use data to enrich products, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool example of an influence and a sort of pace setter in the space. I didn't expect you to go to Disney Pixar, but that's exciting. So when it comes to, I imagine, like you talked about, that's going to enrich those relationships. People connect with the type of magic moments that you're talking about. What other things do you use? I know we talked a little bit offline about using social and LinkedIn short form to, again, build and strengthen those outreach efforts and those relationships. Talk a little bit about what your strategy has been behind all of that.
Yeah, really, LinkedIn for me is somewhat twofold, and we've been pushing content through LinkedIn in terms of just our thinking around this and trying to share some of these stories and try to get just our general audience in a frame of thinking to say, hey, that's kind of what I feel like I've been wanting, but we haven't been achieving. And really the real driver for LinkedIn for me is that we play in a people-driven sport, right? So that the things that I've described that we're good at don't just come from saying, hey, this is how we're going to go about doing our business, because what we are aiming at is the very things that make us different. And so it's really finding people that are frankly inspired by that. I sit in, still pretty much every interview today, and I spend recent times, because we're going through a good growth spurt, probably 20-30% of my time at this stage just doing active recruiting, coffees. That a lot of it starts with LinkedIn, finding the right types of profiles or backgrounds or companies that I think are achieving some of the things that we want to do well. And at the very least, I usually can establish a connection to learn from this individual, but certainly it's always trying to take an angle of like, hey, this is what we're doing. Is this something that inspires you and that you're interested in? And from a recruiting standpoint, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, but I think most folks post a job listing, and frankly, most of the people looking for jobs aren't going to tend to be the people necessarily that you want. It's certainly, we obviously post jobs. We take in a lot of candidates. It's something that we're really proud of. But then there's also this talent pool that's out there that isn't looking. And can you pique their interest? And can you really build your team in a way that you're finding truly the right people that can live out this vision day to day as we execute with our partners and clients?
Yeah, that is so hard to scale, right? Finding people who believe in what you believe in, and it's so difficult to sort of control for. Sounds like what you're describing. What couple of qualities when you are in that recruiting mode and you're in that task, what's the last couple of things you saw in a couple of candidates that just made you go, wow, this is a person I have to have on my team?
Yeah. So I guess, it starts with kind of emotional intelligence and just temperament and personality, because culture is really important. But I think for me, one of the questions that I commonly ask is tell me the last book you read. I like people that are doing, when you think about your job, you're not really paid to be doing homework outside of the tasks that you're assigned within your kind of day-to-day operations. And so I personally get inspired when somebody is really spending time outside of work, like learning and understanding things like where's voice going, there's a book called Hooked. It's a wonderful product book that I encourage a lot of folks to read. And so there's books like that I look for cues, and then asking people, why are you reading that book? And I can eliminate somebody pretty quickly if they can't really get to an answer pretty fast, or they don't really have something that they've been engaging with in that sense. And then I ask them how they do their homework, right? How do you stay relevant in a market that moves so fast? And if I don't find that somebody's kind of found that path that can keep them not just relevant, but really kind of using their imagination beyond the curve. And then the last thing is we play obviously with a lot of design and development talent. And I really encourage our engineers and our designers to think beyond their craft. An engineer is going to write code, and the expectation is they're going to write good code here. And I can expect that. But if they can start to understand, what does it mean when Apple puts Apple TV into a Samsung TV, right? And what is that? How is that going to change our lives? What's going to happen then? What other ideas are out there? So you start trying to really think about these things in kind of a more 360-degree view versus just, I write code, that's what I do. I'm really good at it. And we want that too. And not everyone has to have this personality, but I want to have more people that think that way and that are inspired that way, because that just brings your culture to a point where that is the core of your business.
Today's growth story revolves around search engine marketing. Delphix, a big data platform, had hired an agency to manage their Google ads a few years ago, but they weren't seeing the results they wanted to see. Being such a technical B2B solution, they set out to find a team that could take on their challenge. After countless proposals, they found the perfect fit: Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. In just 1 week after launching Directive's campaigns, Delphix saw their lead volume double and their cost per lead drop by 60%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
Yeah. And especially if what you're building the business on, or part of what you're building the business on, is, again, these relationships, you have to be an individual who is yourself susceptible to magic moments, I think,
right,
to inspiration, in order to be able to convey that. So that makes so much sense. Talk a little bit about, before we wrap up here, a couple examples of ways that you build those relationships and trust with your clients quickly.
Yeah, I think it's an organic kind of skill that I have. I think it's just, treat people the way you want to be treated, just a general respect. And for me, it's not, obviously I'm a capitalist. Like, we need to make margin. That's what a business does. But for me, it's not just about making the sale. And I think when you can, at least from a business perspective, from a professional perspective, in terms of the trust in those relationships, I kind of key in on three things that I talk to my team about. Is if you can leave a meeting where the client was inspired, where the client said, wow, that's a really smart person. And smarts really come from like simplicity. And then the last piece is that you left them with an idea that they didn't have before. I think that starts to really resonate with folks, because I think that, and that's where you kind of like depart from selling, right? So like most of our sales, I feel like frankly, I just hired a head of sales and a head of marketing literally in the last 3 weeks. So over the last 10 years, it's really just been me. And it's not like this act of like, I don't want to say desperation sale or it just hasn't been challenging to really drive the right amount of revenue that we need to continue to grow, because our proof is in the pudding, and our ideas are where the markets are going towards. And we have identified that these are needs that enterprise clients, just frankly, they've grown from IT companies. They struggle to hire good talent. They've overinvested and lost a lot of money in innovation, but they're still pressing forward because they know it's important. So if they can find a partner that doesn't look, sound, feel, and say a lot of the same things that others are saying, it starts to be like, wow, okay, yeah, I've worked with 4 other partners, Accenture being one, blah, blah, blah. But this one just feels a little bit differently, and it clearly shows in their work. And with, holistically, it can't just be me. When they see past our walls, they have to see it in our people too.
Yeah. So it's, being a human and being accessible and these things. I do think my experience in sales has been in these Austin startup streets, the very vibrant scene. But a lot of those environments have been in the B2B space, have been these, 150 cold call a day, like eyes on acquisition type of attitudes. And I get it. Like you said, right, there's a bottom line that people have to keep in mind. But those folks who are doing what you're doing, which is putting the relationship aspect of it first, making the connection and inspiring people first, I think are the folks who are going to last longer and win. So you're preaching to the choir, Reid. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, I know you and I talked about offline, that one of the things that we really believe in here at Sweetfish is being this learning hub for our listeners, for folks in the B2B space. And so I'm interested in what learning resource, be it, book you're reading, blog you're listening to, whatever it is, book you're listening to, that's really, inspiring you or you're excited about these days.
Yes, I mentioned Hooked, which is a really good product book. I've read that a few times. The one recently, I also mentioned, that I kind of geek out over Pixar. So the recent, I've read many books, but this one certainly was the most inspiring, called Creativity Inc. And it basically is an entire story of how they've built their business really, really up to current. And it's really fascinating. And I mentioned that we're trying to build a lot of models off of, it's not like they created one hit. Everything that they create is a hit. And I won't go into the details, but there's some really cool things that they have in there that really inspired me. And it was just a really real book about the challenges they faced, because it never is a straight shot for anyone building a business. So those are the books I've read. In terms of like, I kind of go through like a little model every morning. So I look at Wall Street Journal and just see what's going on in the world, trying to understand where the world's going, where businesses are going, where they're struggling. You'll read a lot about like Disney as an example right now, and you just kind of see that content streaming more. And so that kind of puts you at a macro level of where, Wall Street Journal is very much about businesses that are profiting and having to report to Wall Street and work with analysts. And then I'll move into using the Apple News app. And I use it in really not their kind of core, what I'll call just say like the stream of content, but get in, like go right to Verge, go right to Fast Company, go right into, a lot of the tech publications. And really what I look for there are more in the startup realm, like what products are raising capital. And when you see this, I try to peel back the layers of the onion and say, why are they raising capital? What metrics are they trying to prove? What are they disrupting or looking at? And then from there, I'll move to Medium. And my Medium is kind of tailored very much into design, into product, into building companies. And so, between all of that, and I guess the last one I use is Dribble, which is really, it's for designers to post they'll kind of like mock up, here's my version of the Tesla app, or here's what a seat map on an airlines app would look like. And I just create a bunch of folders that feel relevant to the clients that we have and the industries that we play in, so that I can just go to our designers and say, hey, look, this is pretty fucking awesome. Like, look at how they do this. Could you think this way? Right. So those are the things pretty much like weekly, I'd call it like kind of hygiene or fitness routine that I do from like daily, weekly reading.
Yeah. Keeping it fit. Hey, that Dribble. So the Dribble sounds like a mix between like a Pinterest and fan fiction for what you do. That's really cool. I've never heard of it. Yeah. This has been really fun. I'm going to be the one leaving the conversation like, wow, he's smart and I'm inspired. And I'm sure a bunch of listeners will too. How can folks connect with you, Reid?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is obviously a good spot, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. But my email is reid.lappin@vokal.io, which is REID.LAPPIN @VOKAL.io.
Well, thanks so much, man. This has been really great.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.